Hello. I want to talk to you about yourselves. I want to talk to you about what kind of beings you are. And I want to talk to you about something which can be difficult to think about. Not because it's difficult. Some things are hard to think about because they are difficult. The physics that we heard about, the very first presentation from Dr. Krauss, that's hard to think about because it's difficult. But other things are hard to think about because of human nature, because they go against the grain of human nature. And therefore, thinking about them is a sort of unnatural act. And this is what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about lying, about why we lie, how we all lie, and most importantly, why and how we lie to ourselves. Human beings are fascinated by lying. All you have to do to establish that fact is turn on the television. And I can virtually guarantee you that within 10 minutes of whatever you're watching, you'll hear about some kind of lie. It could be a soap opera, it could be a drama, a comedy, it could be the news, but you'll hear about a lie. Pick up a novel, it could be one of the great classic works of fiction, or it could be the latest pop novel, but I can virtually guarantee to you that somewhere soon in the plot, lying will play a central role. So this invites a question. Why are we human beings so enthralled by lying? Why does it fascinate us to the degree that even the Bible begins with a story about lying? And I think the answer is pretty straightforward, and it was once advanced by the man that I consider the greatest North American psychologist, Mark Twain. Twain wrote, "Everybody lies, every day, every hour, awake, asleep, in his dreams, in his joy, in his sorrow. If he keeps his tongue still, his hands, his feet, his eyes, his attitude will all convey deception." And I think Twain was right. If we look at what we say, we lie through our words. We also lie through how we speak. We lie through what we don't say. And very importantly, and Twain really emphasized this, we lie non-verbally. That is, we conduct ourselves in ways to give others misleading impressions of ourselves. We manipulate others' images of who we are. I mean, if you just think about it, how many people in this room, and I'm not asking for a show of hands, dye their hair, or are wearing cosmetics, or indeed are wearing clothes to hide the asymmetries and imperfections of their body. I can assure you, if I were naked up here, I would be giving a very different impression than I am now. How many put artificial fragrances on yourselves to disguise your true bodily odors? And perhaps some have even subjected themselves to the cosmetic surgeon's knife to give others false impressions of them. So there's a lot of lying. We human beings spend a lot of time lying, and there have been various psychological studies that have shown this to be the case. I'll just mention one of them, a very famous one, by Robert Feldman of the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Feldman wanted to measure how frequently students lie. So he set up an experiment in which students were asked to talk about themselves for 10 minutes. And on average, we got 2.9 lies per 10 minutes of conversation time. Now you have to realize this is just lies in a really narrow sense. Deliberate, conscious, verbal falsifications. So if we include all of these other things, what we call spin and omission and so on, and all the nonverbal ways we deceive one another, in any given day, the figure is much higher. And if you still doubt this, I would invite you to perform a simple experiment. Keep a record of all the lies that you tell. You won't be aware of all of them, but just of the lies that you are aware of for 24 hours. I think you'll have a really interesting and perhaps unpleasant surprise. it will be even more unpleasant if you try to tell the truth, the complete truth, for 24 hours, because you'll end up with a lot of people hating you for reasons that we'll get into shortly. Okay, so the picture we have now is lying is pervasive, and I want to argue that lying is pervasive because it's natural. It comes naturally to us. It's not something that our parents have to teach us, although our parents do teach us about lying. They say they teach us not to lie, but in fact what they do is they teach us not to lie to them and to lie in a socially acceptable manner to others. To tell their grandmother that the Christmas present they received was just what they wanted, for instance. So if we get this picture of lying as pervasive, as permeating human transactions, there's an obvious question: well, why is that? And I'm going to quote another very clever man who I think understood this probably before anyone else, and this was the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche wrote, "Life has not been devised by morality. It wants deception. It lives on deception." So if I can elucidate what I think is important about that, is the idea that deception is a fundamental condition of life. It goes hand in hand with life. What it is to be a successful living thing involves deceit, involves deception. Now, this intuition of Nietzsche's is amply supported by the work of biologists over the last 100 years or so, who have found that deception pervades nature. From the humble virus, which we probably shouldn't even consider to be a living thing, to the higher reaches of the primate world, of course we regard ourselves as the pinnacle of that, we find various forms of deceit. You're probably all familiar with the chameleon, which is an odd little lizard that has the talent of changing the color of its skin to match its background environment, the color of its background environment. Well, why does the chameleon do that? The chameleon does it to hide from predators, to deceive predators, to tell the boa constrictors that, not boa constrictors, they're American snakes, to tell the pythons that hunt it that it's not there. But the chameleon is a very commonplace example. There are many more interesting examples, such as that right up there, which is a plant. It's an orchid. That's the mirror orchid, Orpheus speculum. And the mirror orchid propagates itself by deceiving its pollinators. What it does, it produces this beautiful flower, which looks very much like the female of the species of wasp that pollinates the orchid. And it also smells like the female of the species of wasp that pollinates the orchid. In fact, the plant produces a hyper-potent imitation of the sexual scent of the female wasp. So hyper-potent that if given a choice, the male wasp will prefer the smell of the flower to a real female. So we might say that the orchid publishes wasp pornography. And what it does then is it's irresistibly appealing to male wasps who land on the flower and attempt to copulate with the flower. And the beauty of this technique of deception is that everything is there except the specific stimulus that would cause the wasp to ejaculate. So the wasp spends a lot of time on the flower, picks up pollen, and then flies away, only to find another pseudo-female land on it and cross-pollinate the plants. Even bodily organs engage in deception. The human placenta, which feeds the unborn infant in a pregnant mother, is technically speaking not part of her body. The placenta is like a parasite. It sucks blood out of her body. It sucks nutrients out of her body and feeds them to the unborn infant. And you might ask an obvious question, well, why doesn't the mother's body reject the placenta? And the reason is that the placenta deceives her body. The placenta coats itself with a molecular coating, which is like a cloak of invisibility. It prevents the immune system of the mother from recognizing it as a foreign body. It's precisely the same technique as is used by parasitic worms that want to hide from the body's defenses. Now, we human beings are masters of deception. The repertoire of simpler organisms like mirror orchids and chameleons and organs like placentas is very, very limited and very rigid. But we human beings are capable, and we exercise strategic and opportunistic, flexible forms of deception. And the reason we do that is because as an intensely social species, it pays for us to manipulate the way other people see us. The manipulation of other people's impressions provides great advantages. The man who can successfully lie to a woman in telling her he loves her will be better able to get her into bed. And the politician who successfully is able to seduce the populace with words like, "I only want to serve," will be better able to obtain their votes. Good deception, by which I mean not morally good deception, I'm not advocating deception, but effective deception is a passport to success. Now, there's a problem. One of the problems with lying is that when we tell serious lies, when we tell lies that matter, we're likely to have some difficulty. And if you think about a time you told a lie that mattered, I think you can get a sense of this. You were probably feeling awkward, your heart was thumping, your palms were sweating, you felt stiff, your voice sounded wrong to you, and you were convinced that all of these indications were going to cause the person to whom you were lying to catch on to what you were doing. Paradoxically, your own involuntary responses were undermining your own efforts to deceive. Okay. We're undermining your own efforts to deceive. I call this the Pinocchio problem. Because like Pinocchio, you remember Pinocchio, he'd tell a lie and he had an involuntary symptom. His nose would grow, which is of course blatantly obvious to anyone around him. Well, our noses don't grow, although they might turn a little bit red when we're lying. But we kind of tend to give ourselves away. And nature has given us a wonderful solution to this. And that solution is perhaps the main thing I want to talk to you about, the main thing I want you to understand from this presentation. And that is the capacity to lie to ourselves. Think of it this way. If you can believe your own lies, then you're not in danger of involuntarily revealing the truth to anyone. You can lie with passionate conviction. You can lie in good faith. You can lie with sincerity, as it were. And this is precisely, I think, what happens. A lot of the time, that's why we don't recognize that we're lying. The man who sincerely believes his own fiction, that he's in love with a woman, will be far more effective in seducing her. And by the same token, the politician who sincerely believes his own fiction, that he wishes only to serve the populace, will be a far better salesman and be far better able to obtain the votes of the public than one who is cynically putting on a lie, giving a line. Now you might think, let's leave that for a second. So one of the things that shows us is that there is, oddly enough, an advantage to depriving ourselves of certain sorts of information about ourselves. We lie best when we don't know too much about what we're actually doing. Now, you might think to yourself, yeah, but aren't people who deceive themselves a lot, isn't there something wrong with them? Isn't that a sign of mental ill health? Don't mentally healthy people, don't they really know themselves, as all the cliches go, are really in touch with themselves? Well, actually, no. A lot of people have understood that. If we go back to Immanuel Kant, he actually described too much self-awareness as putting one at hazard of developing depression. And Kant's insight has in fact been supported by research that shows that depressive people actually tend to have more accurate perceptions of themselves and others than what we call normal people, mentally healthy people. And interestingly, as they recover from depression, they engage more in self-deception. This can be shown experimentally. Now, this makes a certain amount of sense. If you think about the world, I mean, you're all going to die. All your loved ones are going to die. Much of the world lives in abject poverty and misery. But hey, let's be happy. I mean, what kind of sense does that make if we're looking at things coldly and hardly and realistically? So it makes sense that mental health would be correlated with a measure of self-deception. Now, self-deception obviously has its advantages, and it obviously has its attractions. I mean, through deceiving ourselves, we can give ourselves a sense of our own value, our importance, our moral worthiness, and all sorts of, it's a really nice package when we deceive ourselves in that sort of way. But it's also a terribly dangerous practice in some circumstances. History is littered with atrocities that have relied on self-deception for their perpetration. Look, the architects of the Nazi Holocaust sincerely believed, sincerely convinced themselves that the Jews and the Roma that they were exterminating were terrible hazards to the world, were evils that needed to be disposed of, just like a terrible disease needed to be disposed of. Of course, they knew better, but it suited their purposes to fool themselves. We're in Mexico. The conquistadores did not need Bartolomé de las Casas to tell them that the Indians were human beings. They knew that. They had all that was required to know that, but it suited their purposes to treat the Indians, in the words of Bernardino de Vinaya, as, quote, a third species of animal between man and monkey, created by God for the better service of man. If we can convince ourselves, if we can fool ourselves that other human beings are less than human, if we can kill them, therefore, with impunity, we relieve ourselves of a moral burden. We give ourselves much greater behavioral flexibility than would otherwise be possible. And, well, you have only to look at the world around you. The historical examples that I gave you are more recent examples. I mean, I said to the Nazis, Jews had a non-human essence. They were equivalent to rats. The Tutsis in the Rwandan genocide were cockroaches, and we can find example of this. So I guess what I want to conclude with here is that if my analysis that I've given you is anything like right, in its very condensed form, deception and self-deception are necessary features of being a living human being. It's like breathing and sweating. It comes to us naturally. We have to work at constraining it. But anyone who takes truth seriously who thinks truth is important and wishes to combat the collective deceptions and lies, which can give these horrible results, these horrible, wicked acts, needs to take this seriously. If you're interested in truth, you need to understand what you're up against. You need to grasp that as a human being, you are a natural-born liar. To paraphrase Vegetius, the Roman historian who wrote, "Let him that desires peace prepare for war," I think we should follow his example and say, "Let him that desires truth prepare for lies." Thank you.